Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to Our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is John Roberti. Today's topic is, what are the ways to lead yourself? First, indispensable lessons in business and in life. As many of us develop our law practice, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to deliver great results for our clients, how to learn about the substance. And sometimes what we neglect is our own development and the importance of leading others. Now, leading doesn't necessarily mean leading just within your organization. It means leading within the bar. It means maybe leading a team of clients. It can be a lot of different things. What we wanted to do today was to take a step back and get some advice from an expert in this area about how people can think about lessons that people can learn that will help them to become better leaders. My co-host is Ricardo Woolery. Hi, Ricardo.
Hey, John.
Ricardo, what are we doing today?
So today, we're going to talk about ways to lead yourself, whether in the workplace or in other social contexts in your life.
Who is our guest?
Our guest today is Michelle Ray, and Michelle is an award-winning international speaker, consultant, author, and founder of Lead Yourself First Enterprises. Michelle has worked with many global brands, business associations, government groups, as well as private law firms. And Michelle has served as a program director with Junior Achievement, which is an internationally renowned nonprofit committed to educating future generations. And just as importantly, Michelle is also an author. She has authored Lead Yourself First, Indispensable Lessons in Business and in Life.
Well, and I'll also say, Ricardo, Michelle spoke to some of the leaders of the Antitrust Law section, and we learned quite a bit from her. So I'm looking forward to this. What are we hoping to get out of this?
So we wanna give folks at least three big takeaways today. First, we want to give them better ways to cultivate and execute strategies to overcome indecision. Secondly, we want to help folks figure out ways to motivate other people to achieve certain collective goals. And third, we want to help people better navigate the social forces that impact the relationship between bosses and employees in the workplace.
Great. Well, let's bring in our guest. Michelle Ray, welcome to our program.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we're going to do all of that in one podcast.
One podcast. Very efficient.
Yes.
So first question, Michelle, let's talk about facing indecision. Whether you're confronted with uncertainty or adversity or change in the workplace, we've got to work through indecision from time to time. So in overcoming indecision, what are some of the key strategies you believe are essential?
Well, that's such a great question. And I think, in my experience, thinking about all the different pressures that people are facing, it's no wonder that there are times where we feel stuck and we feel like we can't make decisions because there's so much coming at us on any given day, and it varies from one day to the other. So, I would say, first of all, it depends on the type of decisions that we need to make and the quality of those decisions. What is going to be the impact? Are these, major decisions? Because I think that you could argue that there is a certain quality attached to the types of decisions that we need to make. So maybe that's helpful for people to understand that they can approach that whole process of moving forward and getting unstuck from that perspective. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves, what's the worst thing that can happen? And maybe that can help to ease our fears or put things into perspective. And, what's the best thing that can happen by making this decision? So it really depends upon what is it that people are struggling with. I think if you're talking about change, organizational change, personal change, that's a huge issue right now for many people. And we need to understand the ramifications in that case of staying in the status quo as opposed to moving forward.
So let's I think that's a great answer in helping us to break it down. So let's look at it from the perspective of a more senior attorney at a law firm who is looking at more junior associates and trying to figure out ways to tweak the culture, ways to tweak the assignment process, ways to get more out of their associates. What are some of the things that leaders in that position looking down at those within their organization and getting the most out of them? What should they be thinking?
Oh, that's such an excellent question. I think, in those circumstances, this is where, especially when you're talking about the title of having a leader, my premise when I wrote Lead Yourself First is that we all make the choice to be the leaders of our own lives. When you're in a role of leading others, you have tremendous impact and influence. And we need to be cognizant of that impact, especially today when you've got young associates in a law firm that want to be there, that are excited about their career path and are exposed to you on a daily basis as that role model, that mentor. So we need to take that role very seriously. And I think it's really important for leaders to understand that the skill set, compared to the legal skill set, is very different. Leading people is a specialty. Mm-hmm. And, this podcast, we focus so much on the human side. And I think that's equally important when you're talking about leadership. So being aware of really getting to know your team, really getting to know each individual, because you asked me about where you would assign them, what would you get them to do? Well, you can't take a cookie cutter approach with everyone. You need to really take the time to get to know people. And I just want to say that this is something that some leaders really struggle with, that they think, or they have the misconception that, the way that people want to connect is only digital. Mm-hmm. And it's far more than that. So you need to build a relationship, essentially.
I've found some of the best leaders that I've been lucky enough to be associated with. I found they have a couple qualities, and I'd be interested in whether these are things that you found. One is I've found that they tend to have very, very good empathy, and that they are, that while they don't necessarily always want to be my best friend, they listen and they try to understand, the situation that in this case the young associate may be facing. And the second thing that I've found, again, I think a little counterintuitively, is they tend to be okay with showing their vulnerability.
Yes.
And again, that leads to a higher level of trust, I think, among the younger folks. I was wondering if that was consistent with things you've observed as well.
100% true. And in fact, as I am deep in the midst of writing my second book, this whole question of empathy and the core skills that leaders need to lead into the future is something I'm very passionate about. So there is a direct correlation between empathy and trust and transparency, because people want to know that you're human. And I know it sounds so cliched, but it's never been more true. And hand in hand with this comes the idea, and this is how I like to describe it. We're now in an age of parity as far as the employee-employer relationship.
What does that mean?
What I mean by that is you've got a workforce that really sees themselves as equal to you as a leader. And this is something that a lot of leaders struggle with because their experience or their ego gets in the way. So, there were times when many of us were growing up and remember our early experiences with leaders and law firms or whoever our employers might have been, and we revered that person. And while I think that is still true, we're now in a time where this current workforce and the emerging workforce expect to be seen, as I just said, as an equal. They They want to be seen. They want to know that you are approachable, that they can shoot the breeze with you, that they can talk about their life, and they can learn something about yours in order to be able to connect with them. And, some people are prepared to do that while others really need help.
So just taking that empathy point a step further, what are some of the strategies employers or leaders can utilize when the folks they're trying to be empathetic towards don't have the same backgrounds, don't have the same frame of references that they grew up with? How do folks overcome that disconnect between what they know and what they're comfortable with and the folks they're trying to connect with?
So, yes. Well, I think that comes down to a number of things. First of all, you've got to build your credibility. So credibility isn't something that people just assume that you have. You need to earn that credibility. So how do you earn that credibility to build a relationship and develop empathy if empathy skills don't come naturally to you? I think it's a question of we really need to educate ourselves about the values of the individuals that are working in our teams, what's important to them, and this just comes from being comfortable to ask questions, to, meet people informally, to let them know that you're available. And again, to really just understand, how they're thinking and how they're operating, and to realize that, we are dealing today with a large cohort who are very entrepreneurial in everything that they do. So, they're not, they don't have the fear to ask questions and get to know you, and we need to be equally as open with them.
Got you.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And as we talked a little bit about vulnerability as well, and showing your vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And maybe another way to say what I was trying to express before is some of the great leaders that I've been around, again, lucky to observe and to follow, have been really good about self-awareness.
Yes.
And particularly the limits, what their limits are. Could you speak a little bit, if you agree, could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure, I totally agree because, I don't know, I have an expression, humility is not humiliation. And again, when you sort of strip away all the titles, you're left with people. And I think that is, very attractive to people to know that you've made mistakes, you've learned from them, you've grown from them. So that's how, we start to build stronger connections, is to display some of that vulnerability and to demonstrate to people that, we are not perfect. And I think that, again, sets a comfort level. So the more that we do that, as you rightly said, John, that's how we build, the more transparent we are, the more we show that human side of who we are, then we're going to go a long way to building the relationship, keeping that great talent, encouraging them to have a career with us. I think that's really critically important.
If I may just switch perspectives a little bit from that of, more senior leaders in organizations to I'm going to say more junior leaders, if you will. Is it a misnomer for first years, second years, third years to really conceptualize themselves as leaders, or to think of themselves as leaders, or to be thinking about ways in which they can lead themselves?
Well, I think, again, it's about influence. So great leaders create great leaders as opposed to creating more followers. I think that that's going to be determined by the individual themselves who is leading those people, and it's also going to be determined by your organizational culture. So, when people come into a workplace, they will immediately start to sense that culture and how leaders are interacting with them. So I'm not sure if I directly answered that question. I think, maybe I can put it this way. Leadership is also about mindset. And, so some people have that naturally. Some people need to work on that. Mm-hmm. And the more that they are supported and encouraged and given the tools they need to succeed, then I think that also helps them to see themselves more as leaders.
So what do you say to the more junior employee who doesn't think that they naturally have that leadership mindset, but look at the culture within their organization and definitely see the value to developing and cultivating and demonstrating those leadership qualities? What do you say to them and things they can do?
Well, I think first of all, when you're faced with something that seems rather daunting, like building your career and, getting to know all your colleagues and other leaders in the organization, just start incrementally. Start, looking at projects, looking at opportunities and, ways that you can make a name for yourself without feeling this huge sense of overwhelm that you have to do everything immediately. You can leave your mark by working on one particular case, one particular project, and then you'll see that it'll build your confidence and it'll help you with what lies ahead of you. So again, just tackle everything step by step and recognize that you wouldn't be there if people didn't believe in you. I think that's a really key point as well. It's a very competitive world and you've been hired because of your talents, and those talents are probably multifaceted. Mm-hmm. So I think it starts with that self-belief, and John just mentioned that too, about self-awareness. So rather than taking on so much that you feel overwhelmed, just take it step by step.
And I think, Michelle, again, I'd be interested in your view on this, but I think asking for help is okay too.
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. That's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And collaboration is also another very attractive trait that leaders need to build for themselves and with their teams, because we can't know it all. And I think that once you have that experience yourself with a leader, that teaches you how to become a better leader in turn.
What are some of the qualities? I'm going to flip the question around a little bit, if that's okay. What are some of the qualities that we see in people that fail as leaders? What do they not do?
What do they not do? Oof, that's. I wish the list wasn't so long, but let me see. They don't make time for people. They don't prioritize people. They might. I'm telling you what they don't do. They don't. Some of the mistakes they may call people out publicly instead of knowing the appropriate time to deal with an issue. They lose credibility because they're not a person of their word. So they think that, just because of their position, they can keep people waiting for an important meeting or a telephone call. So immediately that diminishes their effectiveness. I think I just said it. They just don't really take the time to get to know people and realize that no matter how high tech our law firms become, our world becomes, that it's really still always going to be about people.
Well, and I think that's right. And I think part of it is also a mistake, perhaps, in the amount of information to share.
Yes, and not share. I think there's an expectation that when there's difficult news for people to hear, that really is that really causes issues for many leaders. They don't know how to deliver that news. They may do it in a very calculated way, and that's an immediate turn-off. So again, it comes down to what I said earlier about credibility. The more you work on building your own credibility, the easier it is to build the trust, the easier it is that when you've made a mistake, people will be more accepting of that. So it's the interpersonal side that we really can't neglect.
And I'll flip the question again. I think we've been flipping questions multiple times though. But what advice do you give to someone more senior who's actually in leadership position, or someone more junior who's aspiring to get to those positions, when they make mistakes, when they fall in short of the expectations of the group, when they have lost the credibility and the trust of the folks they're leading? What advice do you give to those folks to basically rehabilitate themselves?
That one of the most important things you can do is to actually say, I know I've screwed up. I know I could have done a better job. And and you always make it about yourself. I've been reflecting on the conversation that I had with you, or whoever it might have been, or the meeting that I was in, or, whatever it was I was working on. And I realized that there are so many things, or there are one or two things, whatever it might be, that I could have done differently. And what would be really helpful to me is to learn from you, some ways that, what did you see? What did you perceive about me in those situations that I can improve on? Now, you're probably going to blow people away by asking those questions, but it's going to go a long way to improving a situation where some of that credibility might have been damaged.
One of the things is interesting as a group, primarily of lawyers, we have economists as well, but as lawyers, we're trained, and classically, remember the paper chase, you want to think like a lawyer. And we're trained to think in a certain way and to analyze problems and to be, be an advocate. You've worked a lot with lawyers and on the leadership skills with lawyers. How does the training that lawyers get, how does it, if at all, does that change how they have to think about being leaders? In other words, is there something that's ingrained in lawyers as they go through their legal education process that maybe needs to be dialed down or turned off as they stand in their role as leader rather than advocate?
That's interesting, because I think perhaps one of the areas that can be a strength and it can be a weakness is that obviously many people listening are incredibly skilled at asking the right questions and having all the information. And, really preparing so well for, when you need to access that information. So I think that, therefore, the difference is that when you're in a situation that you're completely unprepared for, like something that might happen, a dynamic between you and another individual at work or one of your team, that is something happens that's unexpected, that might be more difficult because you haven't really planned for that. So I think it's just really, really important that people understand the manner that you deal with people on a team isn't the same as how you might deal with a case, with an antitrust issue. I think it's just really having that mindfulness to recognize that it's not the same thing.
The other thing that I notice in I think law firm culture and probably other places as well is we tend to anoint as leaders the people who are best skilled at what we do. So, if you're really good at being an advocate or you're really good with clients, all of a sudden you find yourself in a leadership position, and the skills are not necessarily, the two skill sets are not necessarily matched. Mm-hmm. You've worked with law firms. How do you help law firms overcome that?
I think you could ask that question of so many different, industry sectors, and I think people just need to, help. I mean, this is some of the work that I do when I go into organizations and I consult with leaders is, to help them to ask the questions about, tell me more about your decision to put this person into this role. How you arrived at that decision, and understanding the process as to why you feel that they're the best person for that role, rather than necessarily saying, I think you might have made a really big mistake. But I think it is all about preventative maintenance. You've got to be thinking ahead and asking yourself that question before you actually do it, because they may not be the right individual to be in a leadership role. They may not even want that responsibility. And I too have seen that in law firms and in other businesses. So it can backfire, and you need to think of the business, and you need to think of the business ramifications by every appointment that you make. So that's a really great question, and very important to prepare and be conscious of the decision that you make.
When you are working with leaders, how much does a skill as a leader come innately? How much does it come from kind of watching others and learning how others do things? And how much of it is bestowed?
Well, I think a lot of this, in some ways, when you're inspired by another person, it's intangible. It's an experience. It's a feeling that you get. It's the energy that you feel around that person, and those are the type of motivators that really drive people. It's just that overall sense that we have about another person that makes us want to do better. I know that was definitely the case for me, And, it's almost magnetic in a way that, we get really excited about that energy. People are, very excited about the energy of what you're doing with this venture. And it's the same sort of thing. So I'm not sure if that's exactly the answer that hopefully is helpful to people, but that's been my experience. And coming back to what I just said earlier, there's a lot of really incredible research that has been done by Gallup and other renowned organizations, research organizations. And the State of the American Manager is an incredible report that's been coming out for years. And they say that very often the people that have been appointed in the role of manager, 80% of the time, it's not the right fit. So that's a pretty startling statistic. So what are we learning? Have we learned anything if we keep making that kind of mistake? And I think we need to really be aware of that. Maybe there's a whole way of restructuring how we go about our practice that might not require that many leaders, or we could be more of a flat structure.
One last question on this topic, but shifting a little bit. You mentioned earlier that today you find that a lot more folks in workplace settings have that entrepreneurial spirit. And when I heard that, I think of a lot of folks who are very comfortable, like getting online and trading financial instruments, getting on Twitter and Instagram and expressing themselves, and even monetizing that self-expression. So yes, I think you're right that there's a very strong entrepreneurial streak in the workplace today. How do folks harness that entrepreneurial streak to actually demonstrate themselves to be leaders or potential leaders worth investing in within law firms or other workplace settings?
Well, I think there's a number of things that we can do. I mean, first of all, we need to harness that spirit by getting them engaged in the activities that they are really good at. So, those types of habits and skills that they have with technology, they're digital natives, so let's use that expertise in our firms, because it's going to drive the success of the firm even further. I think that's one solution. I think another is that many businesses, leading organizations are making sure that they are going where this new workforce is right now. So they're building relationships very early. They're going into colleges, they're going into high schools. They're realizing that, there is more of an opportunity to build that presence at that time through those formative years. And some companies are doing this very successfully. They're creating initiatives where they're partnering with colleges, with schools, to be able to not only get those younger people exposed to the business, but also to learn about them. So it works both ways.
Michelle, what advice do you have for, maybe we're probably covering some ground we've done already, but what advice do you have for a young lawyer, maybe one who's just starting out, about how to grow into being a good leader?
Oh, I love it. Well, I think a number of things that we've been discussing already in this podcast is just recognizing that, your people skills are what are going to ultimately make you successful. Yes, you need to have, you need to be good at what you do, but who you are, your character, is something that you always want to remember is what will draw other people to you. So, it sounds so much like an oversimplification, but I think it's really true that when you focus on the essence of who you are as well as what you do in your day-to-day work, then you're going to become a better leader, and you're going to understand that building those relationships right from the start, getting to know people who you can align yourself with, and how you can get that exposure for yourself through those relationships is also going to really serve you well throughout your career. And they're all building blocks for your future.
Just shifting gears a little bit, one sort of a new area. How did you get into this job? How did you become a consultant on leadership?
I always love that question because there's really one answer. And it's something that you asked me earlier, and that was about, poor leadership. It was toxic leadership that drove me out of my last full-time gig where, I was getting a paycheck, literally. And I realized that there were certain skills that I already possessed that maybe were translatable elsewhere or in my own business. So I just ran with that, and I realized that I didn't have to be in that situation. So that was really the driver that made me decide to take the big leap of faith and do what I'm doing today and capitalize on an opportunity because I was open to change. I was open to removing myself from that situation. And as I said earlier, today, people are more open to doing that than ever before. That's why we need to be so mindful of the type of leaders we are and the type of people that we are.
All right. Well, then, last question. Tell us something interesting about yourself. Unusual about yourself that we wouldn't know if we only knew you professionally.
Something interesting about myself, or maybe, and if this is the right answer, I can come up with another one, but I actually never had children, but I'm a grandmother.
Now, how is that?
Yeah.
You're probably wondering how I did that. I mean, there's a pretty easy way. I have a wonderful husband who has a beautiful daughter with 2 grandchildren. So I skipped the kids bit and jumped right into being a grandmother and love it.
So I thought you were going to tell us about the time you wore a certain costume to make a certain sale. But
yes, would you like me to tell that story?
Please do.
Oh yeah, okay, with pleasure. I was still living in Australia. It was many, many years ago. I now live in Vancouver, Canada. Been here for now coming into my 26th year, been in business doing professional speaking, training and consulting and keynoting for 25 years. But way back when I was still there, before the internet, I was in the media and advertising industry. And we were in the midst of a deep recession, and I was leading a sales team that needed to capitalize. We needed to capitalize on an incredible growth opportunity for our business. And I knew that my sales team was struggling even with this opportunity to make their quotas. So I didn't have to, I chose to go out and do something very daring and went cold calling, which I had very little experience at, and failed at it miserably in the first attempt. And long story cut short, I actually saw a costumes place across the street from my first poor cold call. And I went into this store that sold or rented all kinds of items for, dressing up for Halloween, et cetera, et cetera. And I came out of there dressed up as Catwoman. And I started knocking on doors as Catwoman and purchased popcorn from the supermarket and cold called and told everybody I was from the movies, which was the industry I was working in, because we were selling cinema advertising. And it was a huge success.
Wow.
And I guess to come full circle with that, and a message for, people that are starting out in their careers, is that when you put yourself in a situation where you're willing to take a risk, you never know where those circumstances are going to serve you in the future. And that story that I just told you ended up in the report on business in Canada's Globe and Mail Leadership Lab column many years later, something I never could have foreseen.
Michelle, how can we learn more? You mentioned a book. Can you tell us about the book and maybe where we can learn more about these lessons you've been talking about today?
Sure. Thank you so much. Yes. Well, my website is michelleray.com, MICHELLERAY.com, spelling it out because of my Aussie accent. So I've got my, various services that I provide are on my website. Lots more there as well, articles, videos, topics. And my book, if you'd like a signed copy of my book, then you can buy it directly on my website. And that way you'll receive a personalized copy from me, or of course you can get it on Amazon. And the book is called Lead Yourself First, Indispensable Lessons in Business and in Life. Stay tuned for the next book being released in 2021.
All right. And with that, let's go to our last segment, which we call The Curious Hat.
And now it's time for The Curious Hat.
In my left hand, I have an actual hat that has actual questions in it. I'm going to ask Ricardo to pull out a question, and we're going to ask Michelle that question and follow up. All right. Ricardo has chosen question number 12, which is, what is the best thing about your generation?
Well, then I'm going to give it all away, right? I got to say, I think that I'm a boomer, so I've got to say the music of our time. I just think we were in an incredible era of opportunity and people, discovering the essence of who they were and just being exposed to the most amazing, in my opinion, the most amazing music of all time. That's still being written, I know, but that's how I feel.
Favorite song or artist from that era?
Well, I've got to split it between two. I'm sorry, but I just do. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and Can't Get No Satisfaction, and Hey Jude. I love that song. There's so many.
Are you disclaiming the disco era and the Bay City Rollers?
I guess that I am. I guess that I am. Yes.
Okay, and with that, we come to the end of our episode. We'll see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.